Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our viewers from around the globe. My name is Kathy Smith, and I'm very happy to be here and hosting today's webcast from the International Progressive MS Alliance. I live in the United States, and I'm living with MS for the last 20 years. My professional background includes more than 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry, in research, in clinical development, and also in business development. I've also worked with the International Progressive MS Alliance on some of their key initiatives to advance treatment development. I'm a passionate advocate and a fundraiser for the National MS Society in the United States. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists who are just an amazing panel today. And they're all involved in various clinical trials, some of which were reported just a couple of months ago at the largest annual international scientific meeting focused on MS, and that's known as ECTRIMS. While some of the trials were successful and some were not, our panelists are going to talk to us about what we can learn from every trial that's conducted and how we can take those learnings into future trials, whether it's new ideas on ways to test different treatments or how the trial was designed. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm really excited to hear about each of these trials and what each of the teams that they've been leading have learned. First, I'd like to recognize our webcast sponsor and share some information about the International Progressive MS Alliance. We'd like to first thank Sanofi for their generous support and for making today's webcast possible. This webcast is brought to you by the International Progressive MS Alliance. The Alliance is a first of its kind global collaboration which brings together 20 MS organizations from around the world, hundreds of researchers and health professionals, the pharmaceutical industry, companies, foundations, donors, and people affected by progressive MS, all working together to solve progressive MS. To date, the Alliance has committed more than 60 million euros toward research and has supported investigators from around the world on both large collaborative projects and smaller projects testing new ideas. We continue to add to the research portfolio to try to better understand progressive MS and improve well-being for people living with progressive MS. Now I'd like to introduce the expert panelists who are joining us today. Dr. Chataway, let's start with you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much indeed for the Alliance for asking me to come to this meeting. It's a great delight. Yes, I'm Jeremy Chataway. I'm a professor of neurology at the National Hospital at Queen Square in London. Spent many years working on multiple sclerosis, particularly progressive multiple sclerosis. Scientifically, I'm interested in trial design, such as multi-arm, multi-stage trial, and I'm the chief investigator of the MS STAT, the MS simvastatin program that we'll be talking about today. So thank you.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments. Thank you very much. Dr. Chaudry?
Yes, thank you, Kathy, and thank you to the Alliance for this opportunity. Hello, everyone. My name is Burhan Chaudry. I am a MS neurologist by background, and after a few years in practice, I joined pharmaceutical industry not too long ago with focus on research and development, a specific focus on clinical trials in MS. And I'll be excited to share some of the work we are doing on progressive MS trials. And I'd also like to share that my sister and I, we both have MS. So I'm proud to be a part of this MS warrior community.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudry. And finally, Dr. Farmersh.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. I'm very proud to be part of it. My name is Patrick Vermersch, a neurologist, professor of neurology at the University of Lille in France. My interests during the last decades are focused on MS. I am a clinician first. I see a lot of patients. I'm trying to look on biomarkers, developments of the neuroimmunology, and the impact for MS, involved in many clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and also more recently a new focus, a new interest on patient-related outcomes and the development and the validation of PRO in MS, because of course we need to really put the patient into the center of the discussion.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here with all of you today. You've each shared a little bit about what you're working on right now, but I'd like to get in and dig a little deeper, and so our viewers can hear about the types of trials that you've been part of. Dr. Chaudry, let's begin with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work? I know you're at a pharmaceutical company, and we'd love to hear about some of the research at your company and also your work in particular.
Absolutely. So, Kathy, we are the company I am at. We're running this trial with an innovative therapy. So it's a form of cell therapy, which is referred to as CAR-Ts. Now, CAR-T is an acronym that stands for chimeric antigen receptor T cells. And I'm not sure if our audience is aware with the CAR-Ts, but some may be aware that this is actually CAR-Ts are already used to treat, different kinds of lymphomas. So it is already used in practice. But what's interesting about this specific molecule and why we are running this study in multiple sclerosis is that a few years ago, there was some data released out of Germany where refractory lupus patients were treated with the same CAR-T, and they had really, really good, outcomes, which were referred to as, quote unquote, transformative. And so that's really where we thought that, this molecule can play a part in treating other autoimmune diseases, specifically diseases where B cells play a prominent role. And MS is obviously one of them. So with that in mind, I am leading this study where we will be treating patients with MS across the entire spectrum. So relapsing forms of MS and progressive forms of MS as well. And obviously I'm really excited about the prospects in progressive MS patients. Why is there excitement or belief around this? So these CAR-Ts, as I mentioned, this specific molecule, what they do is that they go against these CD19-directed B cells. So it's basically acting on these B cells and really clearing the slate in these patients. And we all know that B cells do play a prominent role in the pathogenesis of MS. What's unique about this is that it leads to this quote unquote immune reset, where patients the immune system is wiped out with this therapy, and these new cells are generated, which are hopefully not pathogenic towards the patient's body. And so with that in mind, there is a belief that they may have a role to play. Another interesting fact about these CAR-T cells is that they penetrate into the CNS, the central nervous system, in high concentrations. So they go all over the brain and the spinal cord in really high concentrations, and which we really don't have the molecules that are approved for the treatments of different forms of MS. We don't have that yet. So again, the thought process is that these CAR-T cells will really go after the B cells that reside within the CNS and are responsible for some of the progression we see in these patients. A lot of our audience may already be aware about, smoldering disease or smoldering inflammation, which leads to progression in these patients. And the belief is that CAR T will hopefully be able to slow down that smoldering inflammation. So that is what I'm doing in a nutshell.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, and I think I've certainly been reading about CAR T and how successful it's been in other diseases. Could you tell us a little bit about where it is in the development pipeline for MS?
So, Kathy, it's early days, really. So this is a phase 1 study. It's a global phase 1 study. So we'll be recruiting patients from the US, across the EU and UK. This is a phase 1 study that started not too long ago. It's been a few months, so it's still early days, still a long way to go. But yeah, that's where we are, to be exact.
Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's move then to ask Dr. Chataway. Could you tell us a bit more about the MS STAT trial and what were the results there?
Yeah, no, certainly. So I'm sure the audience have heard of statins, which are common drugs which lower cholesterol and are used a lot in heart disease and after stroke. So there was a big, over the last 25 years, a lot of experimental evidence from animal models of multiple sclerosis that they could have effects apart from lowering their cholesterol. And we took them into trial about 10 years ago in what's called a phase 2 trial, where we looked at the change in the brain volume of people with multiple sclerosis, secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, if they're exposed to high-dose simvastatin or the control. And it reduced the rate of brain change, the atrophy, by about 40%, and that was very promising. So therefore, that was the MS STAT 1 trial, and then we moved into the MS STAT 2 trial, which is a much bigger trial of nearly 1,000 people with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis in the United Kingdom. This was co-funded by the UK MS Society, the US MS Society, the National Society, and the Government Funding Agency. And we spent about 7 years doing this trial where people were randomized, as it were, by a computer to taking the simvastatin or control, looking this time at disability. So looking at, for example, their walking. And we ran that trial and it went well and it was well conducted, even going through COVID. It didn't, unfortunately, show a therapeutic effect. So we didn't see that high-dose simvastatin could slow the rate of progression in people with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. So we presented that, as you say, about 6 weeks ago. So we're still dwelling on that. I think there are many positives. First of all, I think it shows that there's a great desire for people with progressive multiple sclerosis to take part in trial so that we can find new medicines. And we saw that in many occasions. And even when I spoke to many participants, being part of the trial process was very therapeutic and very positive, meeting up with doctors and nurses who really understood about progressive multiple sclerosis. And secondly, it says to us, well, we must examine our data. And whilst we saw an effect in the phase 2, why didn't we see it in the phase 3? So underneath this phase 3 trial is new MRI data of about 200 people that we'll be exploring as well. So I think it shows that we can do these trials. We should carry on doing these trials until we have an effect on progressive multiple sclerosis. I think finally, I'd like to underline the fact that what's called the vascular comorbidity, so the diabetes, the high blood pressure and the cholesterol, we know that that's an important driver in its own right in people with multiple sclerosis, and the epidemiology is very strong. And I think we should be more stringent about that going forward. And I think I would certainly say to people who are on statins for other cardiac reasons, never stop your statins. And it's really important. And perhaps a different sort of trial is ultimately needed to show the effect of statins, maybe a registry or something over 10 years. But we don't know yet. We're just sort of doing the early analysis of these results of this trial.
Yeah. It's disappointing, obviously, that the results weren't what you would hope for. But I do really resonate with the point that you made about people with progressive MS are happy to be involved in trials, and I think that they are, that they have felt long left behind with all the treatments for relapsing remitting MS, and it's so good that the focus is turning on to progressive MS. But I'll come back to you to ask you about some learnings as well in a minute. So, Dr. Vermersch, I know that there's a lot of excitement about the tolebrutinib trial, which was reported at ECTRIMS and showed success in slowing disability progression. Can you tell us a little bit about this study and why it was so exciting?
Thank you. I think it's a great moment for the MS community because for the first time, this study demonstrated that indeed we can delay the progression or confirm progression in disability in patients with what we call a secondary multiple sclerosis. Maybe let me come back to the history of the drugs we have used before. As discussed before by Dr. Chaudry, we have used a lot of drugs which are able to suppress almost completely the relapses and the MRI activity, tackling the B lymphocytes. Dr. Chaudry elegantly demonstrated why we need to tackle this category of lymphocytes. But unfortunately, we have quite a large category of patients without any relapse, without any MRI activity, but who continue to progress in disability, slowly but continuously. And of course, it's a big issue. We take some time to understand that even if we suppress the activity of lymphocytes, we need probably to tackle also another type of immune cells. And probably the microglial cells may play a major role to explain the disability progression in such patients with progressive MS. And so the tolebrutinib, this drug tested in the Hercules trial, this drug is able to decrease the activities of B cells in the periphery, but also into the CNS, but also decrease the activity of the microglial cells. It was a background of this study. So maybe evaluating tolebrutinib in double-blind versus placebo, including more than 1,100 patients in different countries. Indeed, tolebrutinib delayed the time of 6 months confirmed disability progression by 31%, which is important and highly significant, 31%, because we used the EDSS as the outcome measure for disability progression. And EDSS is not really sensitive to change. But however, maybe we use EDSS in routine. Most of the patients are aware of what is EDSS. And we need also to use it in clinical trials, recognized by the authorities. We discuss a lot, and probably after, during the discussion, we will discuss the limits, the benefit, but also the limits of the EDSS, which is, I think, a key point for the future. So first of all, for the first time, we have a drug demonstrating we can delay the progression in disability in such a population of people with no relapses during the last 2 years, and only a few percentage of patients had MRI activity at baseline. So it was relatively a purely progressive MS population. It's really the population we have unmet needs. Secondly, it's a significant proportion of patients, the study demonstrate an improvement also of the disability. So the disability decreased a little bit, which is also, with this magnitude, I think it's also the first time, demonstrating probably the impact related to microglia also. The tolerability of the drug is excellent, and globally, safe globally because we have a safety signal concerning the liver functions, liver testing. During the first 3 or 6 months, it's possible to have an increase in some liver enzymes, which could be severe. But with the clear monitoring, sometimes we need to stop the treatment and the patient recovered fully. So it's manageable. But however, that is well known with this category of drugs. Tolebrutinib is part of what we call the BTK inhibition, Bruton tyrosine kinase inhibition. We know that we have this possibility of liver toxicity in a relatively small proportion of patients. So reassuring data with the tolebrutinib trial.
Well, this is a very exciting result. Groundbreaking, it seems. And people listening to this might be thinking, well, when can I get on this treatment? Could you tell us about where this is in development and how long we could expect before this might be approved?
Of course, all the patients ask already the question, when I will be treated with tolebrutinib. So the dossier will be deposited at the end of this year in US, early next year in Europe. So I know that Sanofi, which is a sponsor of and the owner of this drug, will push to have what we call the fast track recording, because we have an unmet need. And so for this large population of patients without any valuable treatments, so maybe of course the company, but also the neurologists or the MS community will push to have this fast track authorization. So we hope in US maybe midterm next year, a little bit longer time for Europe, unfortunately. And after in Europe, as you know, each country need to be agreed with the approval of the drug. So it's a little bit longer in Europe than in US. But before, we discuss with a company, and of course we push to have what we called a phase 3B. Before the approval, there is a small possibility, depending the country, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's rejected, to have maybe in a open trial to make that patient, but also neurologist, to have experience with the drug in real life, not in clinical trial, but in real life. So, which could allow maybe a lot of patients to be treated before the approval. But it's a discussion today because the authorities sometimes reject, they prefer to have a fast track approval, but not phase 3B. So depending the country, it's an issue, of course.
Yeah. Well, very good. I think that's soon, actually. So that's
Yes.
very good. Just so I'd like to kind of circle back now. We've heard about several trials. One in early stage from Dr. Chaudry, one that was successful. We just heard from Dr. Vermeersch, tolebrutinib, and then we've heard about one that didn't meet its aim of the study, the statin from Dr. Chataway. In all of these, it's I think very important to remember that whether they're successful or not, there's a lot that can be learned. And I'd like to hear from each of you about sort of what the studies are revealing and how you want to take those learnings forward into future studies. So, Dr. Vermeersch, let's go back to you first.
Okay, thank you. Indeed, what we have learned beyond the positive results on disability progression, we have learned probably to decrease the risk of disability progression. We need to control not only adaptive immunity, mainly B cells, but also other categories of immune cells, and mainly probably the microglial cells. We have, all of us, we have microglial cells into the CNS, but for an unknown reason or partially known reason, in MS, these microglial cells are overactivated. And we need to switch this overactivated microglial cells to an homeostatic stage. It's important because this homeostatic stage may play a major role to protect neuron and also to promote remyelination, may explain possibly that some patients improved in terms of disability. So it's targeting microglial cells possibly explain the progression of some insidious symptoms most of the patient reports, in a progressive phase or even in the relapsing phase of the disease, such as fatigue, cognitive disturbances, sexual difficulties, urinary troubles, or maybe insidious decline of walking capacity, running, doing some sports, concentration, cognitive symptoms, or even pain. And I think we need to target probably more microglial. So these results is possibly open the door of new drugs targeting innate immunity, microglial cells also, but possibly also astrocytes. We have not time to discuss about this category of cells, but probably astrocytes are also immune cells, in fact, and may play also a role in the progression of the disease. So we call to be able to tackle what we call now smoldering MS, this slowly evolving MS symptoms, which maybe most of the patients are focused on, are faced on. And I think probably we will do our best to find new drugs to tackle these microglial cells.
Well, that's great. Sounds like many avenues to be explored. So let's come back now, Dr. Chataway. The MS-STAT2 trial didn't meet its endpoint, but I'm assuming that I know you talked about some of the positives, but what were some of the things that you learned that you want to take to inform future studies?
Yeah, I think three things. I think, first of all, there's a massive enthusiasm for people with progressive multiple sclerosis to take part in trial, and it's a good thing. And it's very important also not to stop at phase 2 to get a signal. You've got to go through to phase 3, whatever you find. And there's a real enthusiasm, and it's a very therapeutic process. I think, secondly, vascular comorbidity, that is high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, I think is undertreated in progressive multiple sclerosis. The epidemiology is very strong, and we should make much more stringent efforts to do that. But it may take a longer time frame to show that benefit. It might take 10 years, for example, and maybe different styles of trial. For example, registry type work is probably needed to show that. Thirdly, and finally, embedded in the MS-STAT2 are many sub-projects, biomarkers, optical and MRI, and we'll start this analysis particularly and obviously to have a look at the MRI signal in this brand new cohort of MS-STAT2. So doing trials itself are therapeutic, but we learn a lot about the biology of the condition, and that's why they're so important to do, so carefully controlled with beautiful data that will really inform the field in this very much unmet need, as we've said, moving forward.
Yeah, terrific. Those are some great takeaways from the study. Dr. Chaudry, just to come back to you, as a specialist in trial design, what are some of the general things that you've learned from the CAR-T studies, or is it too early to say what those learnings are?
Well, Kathy, like you said, specific to the CAR-T study, it is still early days. But I think, we all, the MS community at large, is mindful of the fact that, that for relapsing MS patients, we have so many treatment options, really good treatment options. For our progressive MS patients, unfortunately, we do not, which is so exciting. What Dr. Vermeersch shared with us. It's truly, truly exciting and much needed. We really need more options for our progressive MS patients, which is why the work that Dr. Chataway did with MS-STAT was so important. And Kathy, as you pointed out earlier, is that we learned a lot from it, And I did want to share with our audience, one of the reasons we've struggled with clinical development in progressive MS is that, these clinical trials and designs usually are expensive and time consuming. These studies are 2 to 3 years, and so you need a lot of resources. Now, with relapsing MS clinical trials, gadolinium enhancing lesions, they act as this clinical surrogate biomarker as to where they can really give us a window into those patients who are going to have highly active disease. And that biomarker was used to really propel a clinical development in that space. For progressive MS, we don't have that biomarker yet. We haven't really found that biomarker which translates to progressive patients like gadolinium enhancing lesions did for relapsing patients. Brain atrophy is certainly one of those biomarkers where we feel like that there may be a path forward. And I would love to hear from Dr. Chataway and Dr. Vermeesh if they still think, based on these two studies that we talked about, if brain atrophy still is an important biomarker that can really give us a window into future progression. And if it is not, do they feel any other fluid biomarkers that we have, that may be a better option?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what they think. Dr. Chataway?
Yeah, no, a very good point. As we've said in the MS STAT1 trial, we saw an effect on atrophy. We don't know yet what will happen in the MS STAT2 MRI, but we didn't see an effect on progression. So perhaps it's a false positive, and of course that does happen. It is a crude integration, of course. It seems to me that having an effect on atrophy is probably going to be a good thing, but maybe it's mechanism dependent. Maybe it needs to be compartmentalized. For example, the deep gray structures, spinal cord. So maybe we need to be more subtle in the way that we think about atrophy measures. That would be my view.
Yeah, interesting. Dr. Vermeesh, do you want to add to that?
So critical point, of course, what are the best outcomes, what kind of measures we need to have in clinical trials. Indeed, in the tolebrutinib trial, we failed to demonstrate a significant difference concerning the rate of atrophy. There is a small difference in favor of tolebrutinib, but not significant. But as said just before by Jeremy Chataway, I think we need to probably to be more focused on some category of atrophy, maybe atrophy of the cortex, for example, of the thalami, or the spinal cord, possibly. And that's sure, it's possibly related to the mechanism of action of the drug. But I think in the future, we need to consider not only one marker considering the neurodegeneration in MS, but possibly also biomarkers like GFAP or neurofilament, for example, or a combination of some could give us an idea of what is the neurodegeneration in MS related to the placebo group or to the active group.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. And I see another webcast coming to talk about these things. But I want to, I want to thank all of you. This has been incredibly informative and just very hopeful, I think, for people living with progressive MS. There's so much going on, and there's positive results. So I think that's really very, very impressive. So thank you all for everything that you do for people living with MS. Thank you again, Dr. Chataway, Dr. Chaudry, and Dr. Vermeesh. So to our viewers, as you've heard, there is so much research being done around the world to find solutions and treatments for progressive MS. And it's always incredibly interesting and full of insights to hear about this research, but very hopeful to know that the work doesn't stop when a trial is completed. There's lots to be learned. So the International Progressive MS Alliance continues to inspire hope and make progress by funding research that can truly improve people's lives. Still, we must and we will do more to end progressive MS. Please stay connected to the Alliance through our regular webcasts and your local MS organization. And please share the work of the Alliance with your friends and your family and as many others as you can. We need everyone to be a part of this effort. Together, we are stronger than progressive MS. Thank you again, everyone, and goodbye.